one, and we're here.
We're here.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us tonight on the After Service podcast. I'm Brian, and that's Joe. And hello.
Hey, good evening, folks. It is Thursday night. It's lovely outside. I actually have no idea what it's like outside.
No, it's nasty. It's cold.
Yeah.
It's
Actually,
Oregon in winter.
Sam and I were out practicing putting, and I'm like, it's cold out here. I'm like, I don't want to be out here very long. It still ended up there about a half hour, but at some point you're like, you start to lose your sense of humor or your capacity to deal with frustration because, like, oh gosh, it's cold, like in rain, like your ability to kind of respond flippantly or whatever, casually to little things. You probably get that way with driving, right? If you're trying to get from A to B, and it doesn't really matter how long it takes you to get there, it's just you're going to get there when you get there. It's a lot easier to kind of accommodate like a slowdown. But when you need to be someplace and time is short, it's all of a sudden you're just like, oh, let's go. Anyway.
It's all about perspective. Golly, I keep hearing that in my head and keep seeing me saying that, but really it is so much about how we respond to something is how we see it. If it's like, oh no, this is going to make me late, which maybe it will, maybe it won't, right? Because sometimes we get all worked up and it's like, it really makes no difference. Like those silly people that I have been in the past, I can honestly say I don't do it as much as I used to, is where they zoom ahead, weaving in and out of traffic only to get to a stoplight down the road at exactly the same time I do. It's like, why are you doing this?
That was something my dad used to respond to that, right? And my response is kind of modeled after his response, right? Like, well, there you go. Look, yeah. And it's sarcasm. Right, like, look at what you did. You zoomed around me 20 miles an hour faster than me, and you're one car ahead of me. Good job, buddy. That kind of.
Good job.
Yeah, yeah. And I find when I do it, I kind of go, is this a helpful response, or am I teaching Sam what I had been taught?
I mean, the reality is they're stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they are. They're stressed out. They're anxious. They're trying to get every last second out of their day. And it's like that. If anything, it's more to feel compassion for them that they feel that way, because it is so much more relaxing in life if you just go, it's going to work out. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wish I was a lot more easygoing. Like, it's going to be fine.
Yeah,
I don't advocate for this, but it'd be like, maybe I just need to smoke some more marijuana and just kind of, hey, man, it's all good. No, I've never had that, never will, but hey, we're off the cuff tonight because the sermon on Sunday, it didn't record. We had a little bit of a computer issue. Computers are wonderful until they're not. And so nothing is recorded. So, I mean, there's the people who heard us on Sunday morning. We can talk a little bit about what we talked about on Sunday, but the rest of it is no one else can hear it. So it's like, what do we talk about then?
Yeah. Well, I think to acknowledge that we're entering a series on Ephesians, and you gave us a background on Ephesians. One thing I just wanted to briefly respond to there as you were providing that background is the idea that this, some of the letters are very much directed at a given circumstance, right, at a given church. This seems to be more of almost a if you can excuse the term, like a mass mailing, right? It's a message that a lot of churches needed to hear. It may have been sent to a number of churches, but it's a general message that the body needed to hear. We just happen to have, the one that's extant for us is the letter to the church of Ephesians.
And there's a couple of them like that. The Peter's for 2 letters. Jude. These are all to just general, in fact, it's specifically to the diaspora, the general population of Christians in the world it's what it's written to. And so, yeah, I mean, sure, you can discern certain concerns they have, but they're not tied to a specific circumstance. So, yeah, but then our as I've talked about before, you really have to think about and work hard at not just understanding what Paul was saying, and to use to the words of pulling out the meaning of the letter itself, Ephesians, but then you also kind of dig out the meaning and understand what's happening in our world, so that you can speak clearly and deeply to both, and try and bridge those two worlds. And
Well,
it's a challenge.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
And that is because Paul was delivering a message. He was teaching not unlike you do each Sunday. And so how do you approach a message that is intended to be pointed, versus one that is intended to be more broad? Like, I think my congregation needs to hear a very specific message today, or at this point, versus one that could be received by any church. And do you think, kind of the second part of this question, that general messages allow us to let ourselves off the hook, because we can say, well, that's probably not directed at me. I've got this figured out. That was something that crossed my mind
That's
on
an
Sundays.
interesting point. Yeah. First, I'd say, something that I never do is I work hard not to have a particular individual in mind. They really need to hear this message. And I know there are times where people will feel like that. And it's not, it really isn't. I'm really not doing that. But in terms of general, just because I wish it was more often that this was what I really felt like our people needed to hear this Sunday. I really wish almost all of them were that way. And because I feel like then I've really done a great job of understanding where my people are, and the challenges that they're struggling with in general in life. And I don't always do that. And so sometimes it just ends up being, well, this is truth. And as my wife often reminds me, did you preach truth? Yep. Okay, well, then that's enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly don't envy you in that respect, because I know the times that when I have prepared and delivered a sermon, that most of my focus is so much on, am I accurate? And, am I reading this correctly? Because there's a huge responsibility related to that. And I think, it takes kind of the next level to go to, in the same way that we're supposed to kind of, exegesis, to kind of pull from the scripture, but what's the context for today, right? It just takes so much more effort to kind of, what's the appropriate context that I can deliver to these people, especially these people that I know. And just like distractions, there's two pieces, right? The person who is delivering and the person who's receiving. They both have to be in the right position, frame of mind, to deliver and to receive.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'll back off that. Might say I wish it was more pointed in saying, I think there's a lot of value in just reinforcing things that the scripture says regularly that they just need to be reminded of. I think that's enough often enough, because maybe there's a time where something really significant is happening, right? Or maybe what you're speaking to, or I'm speaking to, is not, you know, this very specific small group of people at this specific day, but just generally, what is the culture talking about today? What is the culture thinking about and saying? And that's what I was meaning with, exegeting the culture, looking for the patterns of what are you hearing on social media and in the newspapers and the movies, and that's hard because there's no text to go to.
Yeah.
And we swim. I was thinking about this, coming here, we it's like a fish trying to describe water. We live in it, and sometimes we get so blind to what we're in every moment of every day that having an outside perspective is really hard. It's the frog in the kettle thing, for those who know.
Well, it's a little like what we were talking about before we came on air, that when you are kind of in a culture or a community for long enough, that you start to lose kind of track or touch with what is outside our bubble. It reminds me of when we came upon the name Open Door Community Church, and we did that survey, and the survey was really intended for unchurched and maybe even people who weren't Christ followers to get their perspective on, here's some names that we're thinking of. And and arrogantly, I felt like I have a sense for what the community outside the church, for the non-Christians, non-believers, whatever, where they're coming from. And the response made me go, oh, I clearly don't. That people are, it's kind of shocking how we get so kind of almost indoctrinated is a very strong word, but we are so
tunnel vision.
Yeah, very much. So
Echo chambered.
Yeah, bumper stickered. That there's a Christianese. I think that's the word you used earlier. There's just certain phrases, and like when we pray, right? We get so used to hearing specific phrases and stuff that we cease to have a conversation with God, and we just hit him with a bunch of bumper stickers.
Yeah. I think echo chamber is the right word, in that we just hear our own voices, and we start to think that those are all the voices.
Yeah.
And so we just lose perspective on everything else, so that we see bumper stickers that we think those are really meaningful, and it's like non-Christians have no idea what you're talking about. And talk about a general theme that we as Christians need to be thinking about a lot, is that the unchurched America is growing, and the biblically illiterate culture is growing, so that you really can't assume that they really know anything. But unfortunately, they think they do, and that makes it even worse.
Wow. Okay, that's a term I haven't heard before, but it's a really powerful term to me, is the biblically illiterate. And there's, I think that's something that we need to be aware of. And I would say that, it's like I studied German in high school. I was a German exchange student. To a certain extent, I believe that I can still speak German. The fact is, I can speak about 10 phrases, and I remember hearing words, but I'm not fluent by any sense. And that's kind of where I was with my Bible reading, is that I really dove deep in high school and just thought, I'm good.
I figured it out. I know what it says.
Right. In the same way that repeating truths in a message is useful because they're not at the forefront. And I think there are people that have forgotten what they don't know or what they did know. And there's people that just feel like because they were brought up in a certain Christian community that they have received enough from that
they get it. They know it.
they get it. Or even people who read the Bible on a surface level and try to apply our current culture to it without the culture then, the context of the culture then. I mean, I feel like no matter to what degree you study the Bible, you really have to approach it with a degree of humility.
You have to.
So I think there's different degrees of biblical illiteracy. It's like when somebody throws out a word, what they call a malapropism, I think is the word, where you use a word incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I used to say, like the word hyperbole, I would say hyperbole, because that's because I read the word, but I never spoke the word, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, but just the idea that those two communities, those two bodies are growing, the people who are unchurched, who are non-believers, the people that are biblically illiterate, and it's almost like you're squeezed in the middle, and it's really difficult to be in the middle, and that's something that Jesus did really well. That to kind of bring it back to what we're talking about. I mean, he was out with those people. I don't like that term. He was out in the community with people who weren't believers or who were sinners, and he connected with them and didn't lose touch with who they were.
Right.
And that doesn't mean he was advocating what they were doing. He was just there and was loving on them. And I think that's, part of what Paul is constantly, he's speaking to the church, but he's speaking truth in love to people that are, ain't doing their best. But he always starts out with, man, I miss you and I love you and I thank God for you all the time. You guys are great. Here's all the ways you're screwing up. Right. And I think that's part of teaching today. We have to make sure that we address. You do that really well. Guys, we're screwing up. Here's how we're screwing up. Let's do better. Much better than going in. I went to a church once where I remember the pastor said, you guys are killing it. You guys are great. You guys are, it was just like something that was it was almost arrogant how, and I think his intention was to be affirming, but it came across as, you guys are awesome. Don't worry about it. Don't change a thing. Like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. Oh, it's hard to balance that both with, it just depends. Sometimes, you have a congregation that's discouraged and you need to encourage them. And sometimes you need to whack them upside the head. And, and that's the same thing with, with employees or kids or when you're coaching your players and it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's not, a formula just doesn't work. I know I've heard, there's all those business formulas. What is it? 2 encouragements for every 1 criticism or something like that. Have you heard of something? Have you heard that before?
Oh, sure. Well, like with kids, it's like 7-1 or something like that.
7-1. Yeah, there's all that sort of stuff.
The thing is that if you love and care for somebody, and that, like I had a boss who hammered me all the time, like, you screwed up, fix it. I mean, very blunt, right? Next sentence was, hey, how's the family doing? How's Sam? How's he doing? Because he knew me. He knew my family. He, there was a personal connection. So when he delivered the criticism, I knew I wasn't afraid of the criticism. I didn't want to get criticized, but he was right. And it was evident he was right. And it was also evident that he really loved me. And still, he's still a friend. We still go have lunch, And I think to try to reduce it to a formula doesn't work. People see through that.
No, I mean, it's a good rule of thumb, but you can't reduce it to a formula.
Right.
If there is a formula, it's be more gracious to people and kind and make sure they know that you really love them.
Yeah. That doesn't mean you're a pushover.
No. I remember that one of the things that our favorite Jan, she said that when I first came here, she wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it until I had a Sunday where I chastised the whole congregation for being all messed up and not allowing things to happen that shouldn't have. And she goes, "Yep, he's the right guy." I don't do that very often, but sometimes you need to, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know why. Maybe I just need to process it. If I may switch gears completely for a moment, I was thinking of this. All made me think about my uncle James, who is so much like me and my dad, and I think it was after he had passed. We were sitting in the lobby at the hospital and I was talking to his eldest daughter, and she said, "Well, I'm trying to set up the quote well." He's like, "Well, I'll just say the quote." She said he was so gracious for everyone but himself.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I feel like that's true for me. I know there's times which I can be really harsh and critical, but in general, I feel like that statement is true for me too. And I know it was for James too, that he was so gracious to other people, but yet he was so hard on himself. And Dad's dad was the same way. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm just thinking about it. So I don't know where to go with that other than just thinking about it.
It's there's a certain. It's interesting because there's kind of a sense of you're going to find it difficult to love other people if you don't love yourself first. And the thing is that when we have high expectations for ourselves, it's in some cases it's easier to give grace to other people because it's what you so desperately want to give yourself.
True.
Right? It's like, well, I can't give it to myself, but I mean, because we recognize where we fall short of our own intentions, and if we give grace to other people, we're going, well, I know what I intended to do and I screwed up. Boy, I screwed that up. I'm sure they meant the best.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of the inverse of what we often see in the world, which is I'm going to criticize everybody, but I've got all my stuff figured out. It's like there's not enough in the middle that's like,
yeah,
okay.
And so many times I think if I criticize, I'm like, because I see you and I think so highly of what you're capable of that I think you can do better. But that's not always, boy, why did this turn into a counseling session? How about we move on? I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm talking to a counselor.
There's nothing wrong with that. My wife's a counselor.
Yeah.
Well, let's,
we can continue. I don't care. I bare my soul. Rip open the shirt.
Vulnerability. I just to bring it back, and it's a great. You just demonstrated a great example of that when we were talking about authenticity and connecting with people. That vulnerability is in many ways the first opportunity and the best opportunity to do that, and it's not always safe, and it won't always result in something positive. There's been, I can recall times in the professional world where I would share. In fact, actually last year, I had something where I was really struggling, and my supervisor on this particular project, or the person I reported to, I was like, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this," and explained that, and then it was turned around and used against me. And it's
you got to be really careful who you share with.
Yeah. I would rather err on the side of vulnerability and authenticity than err on the side of, covering up and trying to pretend that we're something that we're not. And if I can pat ourselves on the back, which is the opposite of what I was talking about earlier, I think that's a strength in our congregation, is we do hear it from people that they appreciate, and it's something that you encouraged me to do so many years ago. Just be vulnerable. There was one week I had just guest worship led at a church on the coast, and they gave me in-ear monitors to use, and I heard myself, and I went, I sound terrible.
You don't.
I was so but that's how I felt. I'm like, I can't sing on key, whatever. And when I came to sing on Sunday, I just felt, oh, I don't sound good, and I was so like self-conscious. And you said, well, share that with people; they'll appreciate it, right? And I hope that the two of us modeling that, and the leaders in the church modeling that, encourage other people to be vulnerable and authentic. And that we are also providing a safe community to do it.
That's hard, especially when we're dealing with mental illness stuff and we're dealing with people who are deeply hurt and broken. And it's so easy to be judgmental and harsh or dismissive.
Yeah.
And we need to be careful of that. So reading articles about that lately. Anyways, this is been a nice rambling conversation. But this is what we do. If Joe and I were just sitting in a coffee house chatting, this is what it would be like.
Yeah.
And so thanks for eavesdropping on us. For a few minutes, I thought I just kind of forgot about that there's people listening, and that was fine.
Which is great, because if you listened to us before we came on, it sounded like we were still doing the podcast. It's just, that's how we chat. Yeah. And it's pizza night. I'm very excited when I'm off this call, I'm going to get in the car. In fact, are we over? No, we're almost.
We're right on time.
We're right on time. I just want to make sure. Yeah. I have to go pick up the pizza. Vanessa's got a board meeting. I got to deliver the pizza to her. Sam and I are going to watch reruns of disc golf on TV.
Nice. All right. Well, you have a great evening, and thanks for joining us, everyone. And we'll see you on Sunday. Take care.
Take care.